has changed, but one thing remains the same. What's their future? For 25 years, Roots of Empathy has helped create a more caring and equitable world through our programs. We've reached over 1 million children in 10 countries. Being kind, being inclusive, challenging injustice, it all comes down to empathy. Join our mission to change the world, child by child.
Oh, I love that, baby. And that was the voice of Mary Gordon, the founder of Roots of Empathy. We'll be hearing from her in just a minute. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the 2021 Roots of Empathy Research Symposium. I'm Mary Ito, a Toronto-based journalist, board member of Roots of Empathy, and your host today. I know how busy your lives are, and certainly coping with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's made this an especially challenging time, so we are very grateful that you've joined us today. Yesterday, if you were here, it was a powerhouse day. We heard from some of the world's leading researchers, educators, writers, and activists on our continuing theme of empathy and well-being. Now, we know that some of you were not able to join the cafes that we had because we reached our capacity very quickly. I mean, we were so surprised. So for that, if you were left out, you couldn't get in, we do apologize. We just never thought that our symposium would grow to almost, or I should say, I think the latest count was over 4,200 registrants globally. That's representing 52 countries. But not to worry, all three of those recordings of those discussions, they've been uploaded to the main page and you can view all three of them at your leisure. Some of the topics included how we survive and flourish from the crisis of well-being that we're currently experiencing, how we use empathy to dissolve the invisible but very real borders between people. And we had a number of fascinating parenting talks, including a cross-border conversation on Black fatherhood. Also on children who seem to have it all, but are actually anxious and depressed and lonely. And we talked about what we can do about it. And I had a fascinating discussion on the hidden problems that boys and young men are facing and how we can help them. Now, just before we get started, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are meeting. Here in Toronto, we are on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. With gratitude, we honor these ancestral grounds and the Indigenous peoples who have stewarded it throughout generations. I'd now like to introduce the founder, president, and visionary of Roots of Empathy. Mary Gordon officially started this organization 25 years ago, and its programs have flourished right across Canada and in 9 other countries, even during this past year, despite the challenges of the pandemic. Mary, I should have brought a cake today. I didn't, but I will say happy anniversary to you.
Well, thank you, Mary, for the anniversary wishes. We'll do the cake later. It really is amazing that over these last 25 years, tens of thousands of parents and babies have joined children in their classrooms around our green blanket, which is stretched around the world. In Roots of Empathy during this pandemic year, our virtual but powerful recovery program has been able to hear directly from children how they're feeling in these unsettled times. We've been able to offer children a safe space to be able to talk about their fears, their worries, and what they hope for. We will hear from our teachers how grateful they are to have had Roots of Empathy because they realize where the children stand emotionally, and it would have been hard otherwise to know that. A child who is sad, sick, stressed, or lonely is not able to learn. We have heard from children that they feel responsible for the death of a loved one, or that they worry that one of their parents who was working frontline will die. Without the ability to talk about their fears, children carry a heavy burden. We welcome these conversations where children are both heard and feel connected, which leaves them open to learn. We'll hear today from Mary Helen Immordino-Yang about how closely children's emotions are linked to their learning. Our mental health and well-being programs calm children down, help them regulate their emotions, and help them to relate to one another. The children who are sitting in our classrooms today are the citizens, leaders, and parents of tomorrow. In schools, we need to talk as much about caring as we do talk about coding. And as important as it is to learn to read, if children don't learn to relate, we will have a failed society. One thing that this pandemic has done is to make us more aware of the fragility of children's mental health. But it has also shown us how resilient children can be if they are connected to others. We feel that our mission is more important now than ever.
Thank you, Mary, for those thoughtful words. And right now we're going to jump in with a panel discussion about empathy and leadership. The pandemic has tested all of us, including businesses right across the country. We thought it would be enlightening to hear from 3 of Canada's top corporate leaders, the challenges that they faced during what's probably been their most difficult year. What does it take to lead successfully during a pandemic? And what is the role of empathy in leadership and business? Leading this conversation is our board chair, Christy Clark, whom I'm sure many of you already know. Christy spent 15 years in politics. She was the first woman elected as Premier of British Columbia and the only woman in Canadian history to have been re-elected Premier anywhere in Canada. She calls that a sad statement about women in politics. Today, Christy is the senior advisor at the law firm Bennett Jones. She co-chairs the advisory board for the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill University. And in 2018, she was recognized as one of Canada's top 100 most powerful women by the Women's Executive Network. And she was inducted into the WXN Hall of Fame. Over to you, Christy.
Thank you, Mary. I'm just thrilled to be a part of this symposium. And I am excited to have a conversation with 2 great leaders today. I have taken on one of the most important jobs I'll ever do, and that's chairing Roots of Empathy. Today, I have the privilege to join 2 of North America's most successful and influential business leaders in a conversation about something that matters to us all, and that's empathy at work. At the age of 13, Shahrzad Rafati knew she wanted to create a global empire. She left Iran, came to Canada. She had just 1 suitcase and very limited English. Today, Shahrzad knows no limits. She is the founder and the CEO of Broadband TV. It's a media tech company that's had spectacular growth. They create and monetize online content. Her clients include the NBA, Sony, Warner Brothers, and Disney. Tamara Vrooman directed and managed almost $50 billion as British Columbia's Deputy Minister of Finance. Then she went on to lead Van City, Canada's largest credit union with assets of $23 billion. And she's now the CEO of the Vancouver Airport, which employs 26,000 people. Tamara, Shahrzad, thank you very much for joining us today. Now let me start with this, because there is one issue that has defined our lives for almost all of, well, more than this last year, and this is the pandemic. It's upended every kind of business in every corner of the world. It's exposed deep inequities between us. And as we emerge from it, we'll find that workplaces have been altered in many ways. Can empathy play a role in helping us heal? Can it help us build something better in the new normal? I saw a study recently that concluded remote working requires a lot more empathy from supervisors and employers. And this pandemic has required leaders to connect with their teams in totally different ways. So I'd like to ask each of you, maybe starting with Tamara, how has this experience through this pandemic both changed the way that you lead, and how do you think it's going to change the way you do business in the future?
Yeah, thanks very much, Christy. And thanks to you and the Roots of Empathy program. Been a long admirer of that work and the importance of seeding empathy in children in the next generation for many, many years. And so empathy is really, in my mind, about being able to see an issue or an opportunity from the perspective of the other. And when we think about what this pandemic has done, is it's shown us that we're more connected than we ever thought we were, that our work lives and our home lives are intertwined in ways that many of us not only maybe didn't welcome, but didn't always predict. And that if we're going to think about the uncertainty of the future, we need to understand the experience from a diversity of perspectives. And so when you ask, how does empathy play a role in my leadership at the airport? It's all of those things. For the almost 100,000 people that normally go through our airport each and every day and their needs, to the needs of our staff, understanding what they're going through and where they're coming from, and designing our business processes, our financing, our support, including just the way that we interact daily with one another, is a huge part of making sure that we can deliver on the kind of safety, customer service, employee experience that YVR is known for, not only in this country, but in North America and around the world. And so it has profoundly affected my leadership. I've always been somebody who has thought that empathy was an underrated leadership trait. It should stand in the pantheon of decisiveness, focus, vision, the ability to really understand and appreciate things from a different point of view, including the human experience. The pandemic has absolutely made that essential as we're navigating the fact that we're all in this together, and we think about the different experiences and the different ways that we're going to need to work, as well as serve our customers going forward out of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Tamara. I appreciate it. Shahrzad, what are your reflections on how the pandemic has changed the way you do business, the way you lead a team, what you think things are going to look like in the future?
Really good question. Everything that, first of all, I do want to also thank you and Roots of Empathy for organizing this great symposium. And obviously, it's great to connect with everyone here and discuss such an important topic. I think first we need to really talk about what is empathy. Empathy is really the ability to step into shoes of another person, aiming to truly understand their feelings and perspectives, and to really use that understanding to really guide our actions. And during, obviously, this pandemic, empathy is more important than ever before. And the reason why I think it's very important is because without a question, we all know that good values really generate great results. And one thing I want to actually point out is that one focus on diversity actually helps with other forms of diversity. And when you think about inclusivity, inclusivity creates inclusivity. And when you solve for one form of inequality, you can create room to solve for other forms. And sharing your lived experiences can really bring your team together as people that can relate to one another. Mm-hmm. And I think that empathy is really a defining factor for a successful team. It encourages, of course, all of us to see the world from each other's eyes and really to foster our organizations, the values that actually bring us together. And when it comes to BBTV, that includes two of our core values, care and collaboration. And care in really our interactions, in our execution, in our diversity, and in everything that we actually produce. And collaboration, which is one of the other core values that we have at BBTV, it's also like, if you look at it, it really comes down to collaboration and how we actually work together as a team, and in really uncovering mutually beneficial outcomes to build a long-term success. And that ultimately leads to a really healthier organization, because our culture is stronger and more connected. And, we're also physically and mentally healthier, right? We're more motivated. We're more passionate about the impacts that we can make together. And this really encapsulates the other two values that we have at BBTV, which are drive and creativity. And when I speak to drive, it's really drive in how we actually overcome obstacles and inspire greatness from one another in our relentless pursuit of obviously pushing the boundaries of what's actually possible. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about creativity is really in how we actually approach and redefine potential problems, obviously formulate innovative and imaginative responses in our solutions. And the data says it all. The data really says it all as to how this can actually drive business performance.
Well, that leads me to, you're talking, Shahrzad, about gender diversity, which is something I thought about a lot. And I think both of you will having to fight your way to the top in what are really male-dominated areas. And, I had this dilemma all the time. And I saw it in all my female colleagues. About half our cabinet was women. It's hard to be tough and to be liked at the same time. How do each of you navigate that so that you can be seen both as being effective at work, having the right stuff to drive forward, but also allowing yourself to practice empathy and show some softness without undermining people's sense that you're someone who's going to be capable of doing the job?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And so there's two reflections I have on that. First of all, I think when we talk about leadership, we often think about it as one way. To me, it's leadership is a two-way street. And so in order to be an empathetic leader and bring empathy into our workplace, whether you're a man or a woman, you need to not only be able to see and really understand the experience of the other, you also have to be willing, and here's the hard part, to show your own experience and vulnerability. And I think, frankly, I've had to learn that as a leader over time. It didn't always come naturally to me, but my experience has been when I do that, the ability to get that cycle of performance and culture that Shahrzad talked about absolutely accelerates. And so when we think about men and women, we know that it's less about men and women biologically and more about men and women socially and culturally. And that feminine traits are seen as being soft and masculine traits are seen as being firm and decisive. And I equally feel for men who have sort of a more feminine style in the workplace as well. I see that they also have struggled to be heard and to be seen as effective leaders equally with women. So I really do think it is about the way that we perceive these things. And so we do need to get to a place where we are both comfortable, and that's why Roots of Empathy is so important, both comfortable educating both boys and girls to be open and comfortable with who we are and share our own experiences, because we can only be empathetic to others if we allow others to share in our empathy. And then in the workplace and in leadership, how do we get the fact that we know that companies perform better that have empathetic leadership? We know the results are there. How do we it's almost like I want to have a recall on all business leadership programs to get everybody back into the classroom for a 2 or 3 month seminar to redefine leadership away from vision, focus, decisiveness to empathy, creativity, deep listening, and diversity. And so it absolutely projects on women differently than it projects on men. I think equally, though, some men experience it as well. And really what we have to get to is what are the qualities that really drive the results of the companies that are truly superior? How do those perform over time? And how can we start to talk about empathy less as a soft skill and more as an essential business competency to delivering results, which it absolutely is, and has the benefit of doing the right thing, being more inclusive and more human-centered.
Thanks, Tamara. And of course, Shahrzad, if we have more women and more people from diverse backgrounds around the table, we hear those voices which may be expressing themselves in different ways, and it normalizes that kind of approach, perhaps one that's more empathetic.
For sure. I do want to highlight a few facts. I'm obviously, as you know, a computer scientist, so I'm very much so fact-driven. Look, the reality is that half the women in the world don't make their own income. And that closing the gap would actually help the world economy by $28 trillion, which is a significant increase. And this is why when we talk about building a quadruple bottom line business, which what I mean by that is you're not only measuring success based on your financial KPIs, but you're actually measuring success based on people, social, and environmental KPIs. We are a quadruple bottom line business. And building a quadruple bottom line business can actually lead into both a more ethical business, but also a higher performing organization. And I think, again, research shows this because companies that are practicing it are 48% more likely to outperform their peers. And we've also seen the same thing across the organization when it comes to our team's performance. And I think to just build on, I think Tamara's point, how do you achieve this? Well, it comes down to setting goals, measuring them, and really reporting on them. You need to really make sure that you have the right processes, the pipeline, the incentives, and systems in place to be able to make those goals a reality. Mm-hmm. And if you kind of, for example, look at our bottom lines, I'm very proud to say that at BBTV, gender pay gap has been 0% over the last 5 years. We have 40% female representation at the board level, at the manager level, and then at the company level. And we are a global business. This is not a small business. We achieve 40 billion monthly views across 600 million monthly active users. We are the second largest video property in the world after Google. So size is no longer an excuse. And because of our diversity and because of the core values, which really at the core of it, we're talking about empathy. This is why we've been so successful when you're looking at the landscape. And I think, just to give you another example with BBTV, we've implemented, for example, a gender interviewing policy that really assures that we always interview at least 2 qualified female and male candidates for every open role. And this allows you to have actually a very strong pipeline and to make sure that you can achieve your targets. So again, just like any business pillar, building actually a quadruple bottom line business does require the willingness, the desire to be accountable to our progress. And that accountability is really key. And it's really one that we want to actually see, obviously, across more leaders, whether if it is community leaders, political leaders, or business owners.
Fantastic. I love it. I mean, of course, people do get to choose their political leaders, I guess, in a more of a random process, because you'll often have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 people running for office. That certainly doesn't guarantee diversity, though. At the end of the day, it works a lot better when you do it the way that Shahrzad does it. I can tell you that. So let me ask you this, guys. Neither of you is sitting in your office offering emotional support and therapy to employees directly. You've got hundreds or thousands of employees, each of you. Can I ask you to each offer our viewers today, our delegates today, some practical tips for creating the processes that will allow employees and people, at your workplaces to not just be heard, but to actually trust that they are being heard and that, what they're saying is going to influence the future of the company or the future of work? And maybe I can start to go back to Tamara.
Certainly. So a few of the things that we've been working on even before the pandemic, but particularly focusing on during the pandemic is really around opportunities to be transparent and to have two-way exchange. And so while we do have thousands of employees who work here at the airport, and actually one of the benefits of the pandemic, before the pandemic, we wouldn't have been able to get everybody on screen and participating together like we are able to do now. And so we have every week, need it or not, an all staff conversation about the things that matter in our organization. And it's half an hour. It's my initials are TV, Tamara Vrooman, so it's called live TV, which is what staff started to call it. And it's half an hour where I talk about what I'm experiencing and feeling as a leader, what I'm seeing in the business, how it's translating for me, what I'm certain about, what I'm not certain about, because everybody wants answers in this environment, and frankly, there aren't always the kind of categorical answers that we would like to be able to give. And then provide an opportunity for staff to ask me questions very directly in the moment, and I respond, and vice versa. That cadence has really built a lifeline and a bit of a drumbeat, if you will, across the organization in a time of disconnectedness that has really helped the culture. We've also talked about leadership behaviors and been quite clear, just like as Shahrzad said, we're clear about our financial results, we're clear about our customer service and our safety accountabilities and our climate commitments. We are equally clear about our leadership behaviors and what is required to lead with empathy. And we talk about it that way, and we have training, and we measure it, and we call to action, and we ask our staff if they're seeing evidence of that behavior. And then the final thing we do is we actually talk to the people who are ultimately the beneficiaries of the service that we provide. And so, nobody builds an airport as an end unto itself, right? You wouldn't build an airport. It is only there to serve the community and the economy that supports it. And so we equally, and this was, I remember we first started to do it, people were like, well, why? You're talking to business suppliers about things like how we're showing up, how we're listening, how we're understanding what they're experiencing, equally to whether the parcel is arriving on time and in one piece. And so we've really embedded it as part of the way we do business and looked for ways to make it real and actionable, and we hold people to account, just in the way you would to any other business results, and it's bearing results.
Fantastic. And Shahrzad, yours totally different business, one you've built from the ground up. How has your business made sure that your employees are feeling really listened to and connected in this time?
Yeah, COVID has really made many businesses think differently. And I think the global pandemic has really brought the need for empathy to be really at the forefront. And it really is highlighted that we need to collectively find common ground. And in many ways, we actually are all having a shared experience. We're all having to go through COVID, through Zoom windows, FaceTime calls, and we're getting a really unique closeness with each other. And at BBTV, collaboration and camaraderie, I think, have never been actually higher. Empathetic communication and transparency are really key. And despite, of course, working from home, we're actually incredibly close-knit as a team. I feel that actually our team is more connected than ever before. And I'm very, of course, proud of the team for how much they've come together and they've grown greater empathy for each other. And what I really want to point out that is very important is that despite all the difficulties that we've experienced and the team has experienced, they're supporting our community more than ever before. You look at some of the initiatives that we worked on, Fun Indoors, which was really at the beginning of COVID, and supporting Doctors Without Borders and COVID relief. We also had an employee-initiated committee of Work for Peace, which was in response to Black Lives Matter movement. So really, social good is, of course, a big part of the business, and it's something that really unites everyone together, and we're seeing more of it, more than ever before. Now, going back to the topic of leadership and accountability, I think that we need to take a moment and look at, of course, where we see ourselves today. We've had the largest global pandemic, of course, in over 100 years. And the world has been in lockdown. And, the whole industries, have slowed down, pivoted, or even ceased to exist. And this was really followed closely by one of the most important human rights movements, which we've seen in generations. And I'm talking about Black Lives Matter. So with all that has happened in the past year, there have been, realizations as to importance of leadership. And I think we've seen vividly contrasting leadership styles by different world leaders who have demonstrated dramatically different results in terms of how they've managed through the pandemic, comforting the public, of course, through loss and upheaval. And, we've become painfully aware of the absence of leadership when it has occurred. And we've seen also strong and unlikely leaders that have emerged. And empathy is really one of the things that best leaders have in common. Leaders absolutely need to be empathetic in today's, of course, diverse world. And I believe that empathy is really the key to inclusivity. And we need to listen, do our best to really understand a variety of perspectives that we represent and really impact through our business. And really great leadership is at the heart of positive change in the world, and from accountability to equality and, of course, justice. And the solution to the actually world's problem is in great leadership. And I truly believe that empathy is really at the core of that.
Fantastic. Thank you for both of you for your really thoughtful answers on that one. And because to me, one of the things that I think you touched on this, Shahrzad, is that this has been about individuals leading too. BLM has been about people getting out to the forefront and saying, I'm just a citizen here, but I want to have a say, which is so vitally important. And as leaders, both of you have talked about your clients, your customers, your employees, and how important it is for you to all listen to them. So I'm going to, we don't have tons more time. So I'll share with you my experience when I was in politics was probably not at all different from what you have in business, which is I never had time for anything. And I felt like it was the tyranny of the urgent. Whatever was in front of me, that was what I was dealing with. And so trying to find time to spend time doing things that were long-term, but also really investing emotionally in the people around me and spending time with them was hard. And I think often, culturally we thought of it as costly because it meant that time should be spent doing other things. So my question for both of you, I think, and maybe again, we'll go back to Tamara and then Shahrzad, you next. Does it cost money to practice empathy? Does it cost your business if you're going to spend your time thinking about people and talking to them and listening to them and doing all those things when you should be thinking about the bottom line?
The short answer is no. It doesn't cost your organization money to be empathetic. In fact, it costs your organization and your company money to not be empathetic because the damage that it does and the problems and the risks that you don't see because you haven't been able to really understand the needs of your employees, your customers, your communities, to see business opportunities from a different point of view. I mean, think about it. Innovation, and Shahrzad can certainly speak to this, but innovation often comes from solving problems from a different point of view. How can we possibly be innovative if we're not empathetic? The two are not in conflict. They are essential to one another. And, I think what you're getting at there is that old business saying, and it is old, that time is money. Benjamin Franklin first said that, and he was talking to, I think it was in an essay about tradespeople. So he was really talking about the fact that you have to be efficient when you're fixing someone's sink. That is probably true. But when you're building a company and results, really building practices that sustain innovation, creativity, engagement, and opportunity, those are the investments that pay the biggest dividends, and empathy is definitely one of them.
Thanks, Tamara. Shahrzad?
Yes, the same. Actually, you can save money. I do agree with you 100%. And I think we see this because, again, as I said, value builds culture and culture drives performance. And we've seen this and we know this, that, the stats are there, that if you look at how if you actually utilize empathy, then you can actually practice inclusivity, and inclusivity brings inclusivity. And we know that companies that are more inclusive, they are higher performing. We've done a lot of studies and we looked at a lot of stats around this when it comes to female empowerment, female leadership. And we know that, companies that are practicing it, they're 48% more likely to outperform their peers. And these are stats based on real companies. We're seeing this at BBTV. You look at our performance from 2014 to 2019 in terms of performance per head, it has increased by a factor of 7x as actually we've become more of a diverse organization. And I think it's also a lot of times we look at empathy and performance, I think they just go hand in hand, and you really need to actually look at how empathy builds culture, which means that you can actually service your employees better, your customers better, which means you can become more innovative. It directly impacts your top line and bottom line. So I'm a great believer, and it's something that we also very much pay very close attention to at BBTV.
Well, Shahrzad Rafati from Broadband TV, thank you so much. She's a woman who started it all from the ground up with her bare hands and built a multinational, multi-million-dollar organization. Tamara Vrooman, the CEO of Vancouver Airport Authority. She took over a few big organizations, and both of these women have made that culture their own, and very much appreciate your time today. I'm Christy Clark. I am the chair of Roots of Empathy, and I hope you will share this important conversation with your social media community. I hope you'll also follow us on social media at rootsofempathy.org. Join us in making empathy and kindness a worldwide movement. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, I like that. Empathy saves businesses money. Thank you so much, Tamara, Shahrzad, and to Christy for leading that excellent discussion about empathy in leadership. I think you've given many corporate leaders and leaders in general a lot to think about. There is a lot more that's happening with our speakers than what you've heard here. So if you're interested in knowing more about their work, their research, what else they're up to, just go to our website, rootsofempathy.org, after the symposium. Don't go now because we want you to stick around to hear the rest of it, but go after the symposium is over to find out more. Right now, we want to hear from another one of our instructors, a Roots of Empathy instructor, as she shares her experience of working with the program in a classroom.
Hi, my name is Coralie Desjardins, and I am with Roots of Empathy since 15 years. I was in a classroom where a boy felt really excluded and bullied by the rest of the classroom. He was new in town, and with Roots of Empathy, we get to ask questions to the children about how they feel, when was a moment where they feel bullied or where people were kind of mean to them. And he has a chance to express how he felt when he arrived in that classroom. And he mentioned that he lost all his friends, and it was really difficult because his parents just divorced. So what we do as an instructor when something's happened, that kind of sharing, we ask the rest of the classroom, what can we do to help someone in those kind of situation? And the classroom was really clueless. Nobody has any idea. It was a big silence. So I asked the little boy, and hopefully would have an answer, what have helped him in that situation. And he reflects, and then he says that 3 children helped him in the classroom. One by inviting him to do a work group with him, to be in his team, and another one by playing basketball with him. He said, guys, you changed my life. And those children was just really proud. You could feel it. And I think this is really powerful because this little boy had the chance to reflect on how he was helped. So that's really about resilience and thriving through something difficult. And for the rest of the classroom, this is pure empathy because now they understand what these kids could feel in any other situation like that when you're excluded, when you don't feel welcome somewhere. So I think they will be really more able in the rest of their life at school or in a workplace to welcome someone and make them feel part of a team. So this makes me hopeful because we live in a world where there's a lot of exclusion and a lot of bullying. And if we can change that classroom, we can change the world. Being a Roots of Empathy instructor makes me really proud, hopeful, and happy to be part of a group of people across the world that are totally committed to make the world a safer place for the children. Happy 25th anniversary to Roots of Empathy.
Loved hearing about that experience that Coralie had. Coralie is one of our Roots of Empathy instructors in Montreal. All right, up next, we have world-renowned neuroscientist Mary Helen Immordino-Yang. She's a professor of education, psychology, and neuroscience at the University of Southern California. She's also director of the USC Center for Effective Neuroscience Development, Learning, and Education. She studies the psychological and neurobiological development of emotion and self-awareness, as well as social, cognitive, and moral development in educational settings. Yes, she is very smart. Well, we all want better brains, right? Professor Immordino-Yang is going to speak to us about what she calls the Frankenstein Problem. Wow, that is an intriguing title, Mary Helen. Welcome.
Thank you, Mary. And I hope by the end of this little talk, the title will be clear to you. It is meant to be a little bit provocative, but I think it's interesting. So thank you so much for having me to speak about this really important topic. It is really now just laid bare, especially by the pandemic, just how important kids' relationships, their emotions, their ways of making sense out of the things they witness and feel are for the way in which they develop. And what the science is really revealing, I think, in my lab and others, is that the emotions that we engage in with each other, starting with kind of basic empathy, but then also the way that like a curriculum like Roots of Empathy teaches young people to really notice others' development, others' emotions, others' needs, and their behaviors and how they're feeling. Those kinds of empathic emotions that people engage with are not just about developing your ability to be a good social person. They're also really about developing the same brain platforms that you think about other things on. And I'm going to start to show you why that's the case. This really speaks to the really fundamental importance of empathy and social interaction in brain development, not just in brain development for being a good social human, but also brain development for thinking about math and anything else that you want to think about. So I like to start this talk with a picture of a painting by a colleague of mine, a friend, Margaret Lazari, who painted this huge seascape. In real life, it's like 6 by 8 feet. And what's in here is kind of these white squiggles in the middle. And they look kind of like waves in the water, or maybe they look like reflections of clouds. What they actually are is the white matter from a person's brain. Some brave volunteer who got in our MRI scanner and let us take pictures of their brain. And then we peeled off the outside, all the little cells that, that do the firing, right? And what's left underneath, and let me just be clear, we peel it off the picture, right? Not off the person. But then what's left underneath is this massively interconnected, literally billions of little, tubes of salt water that are making sometimes hundreds of thousands of synaptic connections onto other ones, right? All around the space of your head in these organized patterns, and all the way down in, via other connections to other neurons, all the way down into your whole body, all the way to the ends of your fingers and toes and back up again, right? That this is really an image to me of the network that makes this person who she is, right? And that network is developed based on our genetics, based on our evolutionary history as a species, but also what we're discovering is that it is strikingly dependent on the ways that we feel and think and relate with other people in our life. That we have very important kind of need for interdependence on other people in order to grow our brains. Genetically, what we inherit is not a bunch of DNA that tells our body and brain how to grow. It's more like a set of contingency plans that basically says, if you land yourself in a world like this, grow like this. And if your world is more like that, then grow yourself in this other way, right? And we can actually see that the patterns of thinking and feeling that young people engage in are shaping the kind of brain they grow. And that's why it's so critically important to support young people's development in a way that really helps them situate themselves in social relationships, in abilities to notice other people's feelings, to reflect on those feelings, to think about how your own activities and your own thinking and behavior are impacting on other people, and to create things that are constructive together as friends and as neighbors. This is just the fundamental force in brain development. And a program like Roots of Empathy really capitalizes on that to help teach young people how to learn to notice how others are feeling and how you're feeling, and to use that to think strategically and purposefully about how you want to behave and what you want to think and feel like. And that's the essence of healthy development right there. So I put up this picture of, it's not me. A lot of people think it's me. I don't put pictures of myself in my talks, but it's a picture of my sister and my little niece, Nina, when she was first born. Nina was born in an emergency C-section where she and her twin sister and my sister were all anesthetized during the birth. And this is the first time that they've kind of met each other when they're both awake.
And there's so much you can talk about in this image, but what I want you to just think about for a moment is, where is the social piece of this image, right? What's going on socially here? What's going on cognitively here in both partners? What's going on emotionally here? How is this image representing a cultural way of bringing a young baby into the world and of interacting with that baby that might look different in different places? How is this demonstrating a personal way that, that my little niece Nina is kind of asking for what she needs, right? That magic moment where you kind of lock eyes with an infant. Infants bring to this world, neurologically typical infants bring to this world a kind of reflex in their visual system that's built in, that says, when you see two dark dots in this kind of configuration, stare, right? And for a newborn infant, that's completely automatic. If they're awake and their eyes are open, and you can get them to do this, right? And then the question is, well, what's it for, right? And that's where other people show the baby, right? Like, ooh, stare over here. And look, it's the beginnings of a relationship with your mom, right? It's the beginnings of you coming to be a human with me, engaging with me in what we might call a relationship that we hope will last our entire lives, right? And what we're learning is that engagement, it's built reflexively at the beginning. We come with these kind of basic predispositions to do certain things in the world. And the most powerful predisposition that infants bring is a very social one. It's to engage with other human beings, right? And then that gets used and shaped and elaborated over time into all of the ways that we culturally live together, both around ideas and values and around the direct ways in which we interact in real in-person, encounters. And so what I want you to see here is that our development from the very get-go is inherently social. Nina's biology comes expecting there to be a human to look at when she opens her eyes. And then my sister comes saying, like, I'm expecting you to show me what you need. Let's build something together. And that kind of what I call empathic resonance is the essence of human development. And a curriculum like Roots of Empathy is capitalizing on that. As kids become older and more capable of thinking complexly, they start to be able to cognitively elaborate the story and the meaning of their interactions and of the things that they notice in other people. And it becomes increasingly about ideas and values and beliefs. And still about the direct interpersonal interaction, but that piece is only a part of it by then. And so what you need is high quality direct interactions that then become the fodder for this deeper, more elaborate cognitive and emotional meaning making that extends across a person's lifespan and makes them a person who's able to really engage with others, to engage with themselves, to be happy, to be healthy, and to be a good citizen in all the senses in which that entails. So this is a little, don't try to read it unless you're a kindergarten teacher. I'll just read it to you. But this is a little poem or song, actually, that my daughter wrote when she was in kindergarten for her baby brother, Theodore, who she calls Teddy. And you can see I basically just scanned a picture of what she drew with her crayons. It's her in her little dress, and she's there singing, and she's got her little music stand there. So you see a little bit of cultural knowledge about what she was doing. And she says, I won't sing for you. Okay. I'll just read it. But she says, "Oh, Teddy, we love you more than the whole earth size. As the earth spins every day, we love you as much as usual, but sometimes even more as you make us proud and happy that you're you." And so, what is this about? Is this a poem about this little girl's love for her baby brother? Or is this a poem about her budding interest in planetary science, right? Which she's now studying in college. It's both, right? Our empathic emotions and our ability to have relationships with people are the foundation on which we come to understand and build other kinds of knowledge. They are truly not separate. And just in the last few minutes, I'm going to show you a little bit of what this looks like in the brain. It turns out that the empathic emotions that you feel when we ask people in the scanner to do this are the same brain systems that literally keep you alive, that the emotions you feel utilize the same brain systems that make you conscious and able to breathe and your heart to keep beating. No wonder they're so fundamental to our well-being and to our thinking. So this is a picture of where in the brain became systematically more active, the orange, right? More blood being taken up, more neurons firing when people said they felt really strongly about a social story and were really thinking about it, and it was very meaningful to them. And I just want to point out a couple of the main findings here. The first is circled in blue here, the brain stem. This is a part of the brain that's way down low that we basically share with alligators. What this shows is that this region of the brain, which is essential for survival, if you get damage in here, you get profound disturbances of consciousness like coma or even death, right? And these regions of the brain are activated when people are thinking about social stories that feel very meaningful to them. And then we also have something called the anterior insula, which is kind of, if we slice this way and look inside these big pieces of cortex up at the top. What do these do? These are basically visceral somatomotor cortex. If you poke them in a neurosurgery experiment where a person's awake, the person like vomits, right? This is the same part of the brain that feels and regulates your guts and your viscera, tells you if your lunch isn't sitting right with you or if your heart's pounding. These are the platforms in the brain on which we feel emotions and on which we steer our thinking. They're not separate. No wonder my daughter wrote a poem about her love for her baby brother and her understanding of the planet Earth, right? They go together in our minds. They're simply not separate. And that's where we get to the essence of that Frankenstein title, right? That our ability to feel emotions and our ability to understand things is not a bunch of little mechanisms that, scientists can stitch together to apply the science to people and, hope not to make a monster in the middle. It's instead this deeply integrative sort of co-layering of all these different ways of being and understanding that are at their essence fundamentally about building off of the emotions we have about other people and situating our own experience of ourself in the most direct, basic, kind of embodied sensation way, right, as the anterior insula activity shows us, into this thinking process. And that is really the fundamental thing that matters for children's development and thinking across domains. So just to sum up, I've got my little nephew here, Nina's older brother, who's kind of showing us that what this is all about is really about learning to experience your own self via a kind of a mirror onto other people. And that what really healthy development does is allow us to engage systematically with others and with self in these fluid co-constructed interactions in which we really come together as friends, as colleagues, as fellow humans to construct our well-being, to construct our ways of thinking and understanding, to build beliefs and values, and to engage with each other's perspectives in ways that allow us to really be purposeful, be thoughtful, be ethical, be productive humans who can really work together through our lifespans and also understand the ways in which we're impacting on each other and the ways in which we're impacting on, for example, the planet. So just to sum up, emotions, they happen, right? They're automatic, but we need to learn how to feel our emotions. And that is what a curriculum like Roots of Empathy does for us. On this slide, I have some resources for you. If you're interested, on the left is a free brief that I wrote together with a student and with Linda Darling-Hammond, who's a policymaker in education, about the evidence base for the interdependence of emotional and social and cultural ways of knowing and being, on the one hand, in the brain, and the brain systems that support academic thinking and development on the other hand, and how these are really not separate and what that means for educational policy and practice. That's a freely available brief. On the right is a book that you can also purchase that has a selection of articles that teachers, policymakers, parents might be interested in, where we really present the science in a deeper way and kind of put that all into one volume so you can access it. And so to close, thank you for the work that you do. It's among the most important work on the planet, is generating, the well-being and the feelings in our next generation of little citizens. And thank you on behalf of the kids. And back to you, Mary.
Love that talk, Mary Helen. Thank you so much. I think it really surprised a lot of people because there's a general assumption that social skills like empathy have nothing to do with learning subjects like math or science. And I find on reflection of the talks we've been hearing throughout the symposium, there is this interconnectedness of all these different areas of ourselves. I guess it's the old saying that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And back to that Frankenstein myth that you were trying to dispel. It's just a fascinating talk. All right, we have two more speakers right now, and they are joining us from opposite sides of the U.S. David Bornstein is a journalist for the New York Times. He's also co-founder of the Solutions Journalism Network, which promotes the rigorous reporting of responses to social problems. He's based in New York. David will be interviewing Dr. Andrew Meltzoff, who's co-director of the Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences at the University of Washington in Seattle. Dr. Meltzoff is a pioneer in the study of infant social learning. His discoveries about infant imitation have shaped our theories about human social emotional development. And he's been doing some fascinating new research about the beginnings of altruism and bias in children. Please join me in welcoming David Bornstein and Dr. Andrew Meltzoff.
Thank you, Mary. It's a pleasure to be here, and congratulations to Roots of Empathy on its 25th anniversary. Let's just jump in, Dr. Meltzoff. You've been researching the social nature of infants for several decades, and maybe we can just start with some of the core insights to sort of as background to set the stage from the work you've done on imitation and social learning. Maybe talk about some of those studies.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. I'll talk a little bit about those, and then maybe we can transition and talk about Mary's program as well. What we've been studying is a very important channel of learning that infants have before they have language, before they can speak a sentence on their own. They learn by observing and imitating others. And this social learning, this observational social learning, is incredibly powerful. I think we can recognize it in everyday life. Among children's favorite playthings is their telephone, or using their mother's keys, or diving into her purse to pick out her lipstick and putting it on. All these things are learned through observing the adults. Children want to be like us. And I think they register that other people out there are like me starting very early in infancy, and that is actually an important social piece of understanding. Those people out there are like me. I can act like them, and they can act like me. They learn a lot through imitation.
I know that some of the studies you've done have been very sort of surprising. I'm recalling the one where a young child, a young baby, I don't know how old, is watching an adult who has a negative emotion and changes its behavior. Can you talk about that study?
Sure. That was with 15-month-old babies. And what we did, because babies are such prolific imitators and watch so carefully what we do, we had an adult show an action to a child. They used a tool to press a button to make a buzzer come on. And when we let babies just respond naturally, they picked up this tool, pressed the buzzer, and were very happy to have the buzzer come on. But then we did this special study to investigate the power of emotions in children's life and what it means if they observe negative emotions. So what we did is have a person come into the room and sit next to the adult who is demonstrating the action of pressing the button. And when the adult pushed the button, this emoter looked over at her and said, "Oh, that's so annoying. That's really irritating." And the 15-month-old looked wide-eyed as this social interaction happened that was somewhat negative. Then we pushed the buzzer box to the child, and they would hold the tool and look up at the adult who had been responding negatively and look like they wanted to push the button, but they wouldn't do it because the person who had acted negatively to someone else was watching them. And that showed us the power of imitation and learning. Children are watching your interactions between others. And if one adult acts negatively to another adult for doing an action, the child makes an inference, perhaps this is a forbidden action. Perhaps I should not do it in front of this person who's going to get angry. And sure enough, they don't. And if the adult who is angry gets up and leaves the room, the little 15-month-old picks up the tool, looks out the door to see that the adult who was angry has left, and then does the action and makes the buzzer happen. So they're very sensitive of who's watching them and what that person's emotional history is. We think they keep track of emotional history of people and actually classify some into, that's a mean person, you better be wary around that person, and that this person interacts positively with others. And that's something they learn just from watching you and your interactions. So your children are watching what you do and taking statistics all the time.
It's such a profound insight from that. I mean, we think that reinforcement are the sorts of things that really have such an impact on behavior. With those insights, I know you've taken some of those insights and you've looked at the effect on the altruism of very young children. I know that some of this research is still embargoed, but can you talk about the research that's available to be talked about?
Yeah, I can. You mentioned embargoing because we have a paper that's in press and it will be out in May. So we can happily talk late 2021. So we can happily talk about that here. So yes, I had just mentioned that babies pick up negative emotions that they see emanate from somebody. But of course, they also observe the social world, and many people in their household and in their community and in their culture act with generosity, kindness, and altruism and empathy, as Mary Gordon has shown, toward others. And our question from a scientific point of view is, were children picking up these signs of empathy or how you act altruistically to others? And we did a study that was an adaptation of a very famous study done by Felix Varniken and Michael Tomasello that had shown infant altruism. But our twist on it, working with 19-month-olds, our twist on it was to do two studies. One where we had objects that were biological significance to babies, food. And so we had babies who we asked the mothers not to feed the babies until after they had come into the lab. So we had hungry babies coming into our lab, and the adult had a nice juicy half of a grape or a delicious slice of banana that the adult would hold up in front of the baby who was across the table. And then they would fumble the object and it would fall into a tray on the baby's side of the table. And the little 19-month-olds toddled over to this slice of juicy banana, held it in their hands and looked at it wistfully. The adult was reaching out their hands because they were indicating they wanted the banana. And we had a significant number of children hand over these bananas and grapes and strawberries, blueberries to the adult who wanted it. So this indicated to us a form of baby altruism when it cost them something. These were hungry babies who could have acted selfishly. Their mother was right behind them. They could have grabbed a slice of banana, scampered into the mother's lap. But when they saw somebody else in need, they did costly sharing. And then the new study that we just completed, we upped the stakes a bit, and we asked the mother to bring in the baby's favorite toy. And many babies brought in stuffed teddy bears and plush objects with eyes and facial features that were dear toys to the baby. And while the mother was consenting to the study, the mother slipped this object or the baby's bottle into a pouch. And the experimenter brought that into the test room. And then the test proceeded just as I described before. The adult would hold up the baby's favorite toy. The baby would look at it, reach out, and show possessiveness to the toy. The adult would accidentally drop it to the tray on the floor and then reach out, showing that the adult wanted the object that left his grasp accidentally. The babies would pick up their favorite toy, look at their mother, look at the adult, look down at the teddy, give it one last hug, and then hand it over to the adult. So we think that altruism is fairly deeply ingrained in cooperation in the human species, and responding by giving and sharing to others in apparent need is something that shows up even in 19-month-olds. And we believe, for a variety of reasons, this is tuned and calibrated by the culture that they're surrounded with in their family or what they see in the environment, that tunes their expression of this altruism. But the joy was doing these studies on little baby altruism to show that they could understand your needs and desires, and they could act to satisfy them. And even a little 19-month-old, when it was costly for them to do so, would share, just like we hope that we do out in society. Give the shirt off our back to somebody in need, give money to somebody in need, donate food to others in need. We can see the roots of this in the 19-month-old babies.
I mean, it's so powerful, and it's very hopeful, and it's very sweet and kind. But I know that the sort of the same skills and capacities can also feed into bias and can have a darker side. And can you talk about the study that you did? Because I think that there's profound implications for societies and for educators from understanding that as well.
Yes, you're right to talk. We've been talking about the light side or the adaptive side of observational social learning, watching what others do, and the positive aspects of that. But there is, as you mentioned, as you say, a dark side. And that is that from time to time, our 4, 5, and 6-year-olds are observing us and others in the culture being biased and showing bias or prejudice to others in society. And since we know that there's this powerful social learning system at work in the young child's mind, we began to wonder whether that same mechanism might be a process for the unintentional intergenerational transfer of bias by parents to their young. So parents come into our lab and are very interested in about bias, prejudice, racism. How do children get that way? They're not born biased. They're not born with prejudice. But by the studies show by 5 and 6 years of age, children are dripping with them. Parents want to know, are these biases caught or are they taught? And we think we have a mechanism by which they're caught. And that is the same social learning mechanism. So we set up a study where we had a little vignette where there was an adult in the middle and 2 people, one on either side. The adult in the middle turned to one and said, "Oh, hi, how are you?" in a very pleasant tone of voice, turned to the other and acted very cold and standoffish. "Oh, hi, how are you?" Then we asked the children to point to the screen and point to which adult they liked more. The children pointed to the person that the adult had acted positively toward. We asked them, who do they want to share with? They wouldn't share with a toy we gave them with the adult who had been the target of negative emotion, just the adult who had been the target of positive emotion. They wouldn't imitate the adult or learn a word from the adult who had been interacted negatively toward. So this was a very powerful instance that they can pick up our own bias that we demonstrate to an individual, and it affects their behavior. And then in one further study, we looked at the generalization of bias to other people who looked like that target. So we had the targets in t-shirts, like orange t-shirts or black t-shirts, dark red t-shirts. And for instance, if the adult had been, who we showed negative bias to, had been wearing a dark red t-shirt, when we said to the child at the end of the vignette, we want to play a game. I need to go out of the room and bring a person in to play the game with us. Who do you want me to bring in to play with you now? And the children responded, don't bring in that adult. Don't bring in somebody with a dark red t-shirt. In other words, they generalized their bias, not just from the person who you acted biased to, but to others who look like that person. In this case, somebody who had the same colored t-shirt. And we think that's a very powerful mechanism that relates to things that are going on in society today with our concern about the spread of bias and racism. Here we have children who are 4.5 years old. I forgot to mention that in the beginning. 4.5 years old watching this vignette, picking up our bias and generalizing that bias to others to the degree that they don't even want to play with other people who look like somebody that we acted negatively towards. So this is very powerful social learning. It affects our children, and it suggests to parents we're trying to share this information to parents. Our children are social pattern detectors. They're looking out for how we interact with others. They don't know how to act with others in the world. They don't know how to use many tools or how to behave, what the norms and customs of their culture are. They look to us for guidance. And there's a sunny and bright side of that, of children learning generosity and how to turn on the light switch and learning many things from watching us. But our children are watching our negative behaviors too. And if we show a pattern of bias to people who look in a certain way, that will affect our children. Bias is caught implicitly. Children are learning all the time. They're learning from us whether we intend to teach them or not.
It's extraordinary. It's very humbling to realize that what you model is having such a profound effect. And it also really, I mean, the social pattern detection that you're talking about really explains a lot about the way that Roots of Empathy works, because there's a pattern that's being intentionally modeled. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I think so. I think Mary's onto something very good when she wants to talk about the roots of empathy and pass that on to the next generation. And of course, what's so powerful in the Roots of Empathy program is that they're aware that bringing in children and parents from different races and different backgrounds from the children in the class can help spread empathy to people of races or ethnicities that the child might not encounter in their everyday life. And this is very, very powerful. It fits in with this social learning mechanism that has a neural basis that we've also studied. It fits in with that. And we think that when Roots of Empathy, for instance, just to use an example, brings in a child of a different race than the predominant race in the class, and they see the mother sing and act in a favorable way to this child of a race or ethnicity that the children in the class don't normally see. There's an anecdote Mary told me once where she said a kindergarten child in the class, when they saw the mother sing to a Black child, the child who wasn't Black themselves said, "My mother sings to me too. It's just like me." And that like me mechanism makes a connection between the child now watching another child, a baby of another race, whose mother interacts in a positive way. And I think it helps boost the empathy of the observing child for that little baby. And we know from a lot of research that being in contact with people, in positive contact with people of other races or ethnicities than our own is one of the most powerful way of ripping down racial barriers and helping people take the perspective of others. And I think that's what's happening in its Roots of Empathy classrooms.
Oh, that's a really clear explanation. Thanks. It's been a great talking with you, and good luck with the study that comes out in May. And if people want to learn more about your research, where can they go? Is there a link that you can give them?
Thank you for asking, David. There's a link to our institute called iLabs at the University of Washington, and we have a whole set of free outreach modules that help parents, policymakers, and practitioners learn about brain development or how to talk to your child about race, develop empathy, and so forth. That's all. These are all free modules that are appropriate for parents that are on our website. I'd be delighted if people want to take a look at them. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, David and Andy. I certainly learned a lot from that talk. Thrilled to have you both join us today. And for all of you out there, if you ever doubted that kids are sponges, not now after hearing Andy's research. Parents, those kids are modeling you and you don't even realize it, so watch out. And if you're interested in checking out Andy's website, as he was saying, we have also posted it. It is on our website at rootsofempathy.org. Now, if you joined us yesterday, we had a lot of interest in our speakers, including our keynote, psychologist Dr. Richard Davidson of the Center for Healthy Minds. We weren't, unfortunately, able to get to all the questions in his Q&A, as well as some general questions that were sent to us, just far too many. We apologize, but some of them were really thought-provoking. So I thought it would be enlightening to get Mary Gordon, founder of Roots of Empathy, and get her take on them. So she's joining us now. Mary, now we just heard Dr. Meltzoff talk about altruism in babies. Here's a question that's related to that. How does altruism connect to empathy and compassion?
Thanks, Mary, for the question. And altruism, just to talk about what it really means, is the idea of being concerned about the well-being of another, helping or caring, sharing without any expectation of return or reward. And the idea that empathy underscores altruism. You don't have altruism unless you know how to feel with the other, which is what empathy is about. So it's a very interesting thing that we heard just now from Dr. Meltzoff about altruism in infants. But I think the thing about altruism, it is essential for volunteerism. So we are a world where people volunteer, but you can see volunteering drop back if altruism drops back, if empathy drops back. So all to say that I think altruism is a measure of our humanity and how we care about the most vulnerable. So I welcome that question.
Great, Mary, thanks. Now, Dr. Davidson mentioned in his talk yesterday, distraction is the enemy of well-being at a time when we have more distractions than ever. The question here is there a way to harness the appeal of distractions to minimize their negative impact?
Well, the idea of distractibility being the enemy of, I would say, contemplative practice, because what Dr. Davidson was really speaking about was in the field of contemplative practice. But in regular life, we talk a lot about distractibility and Roots of Empathy. It is considered one of the 9 temperament traits. And we look at it along a continuum, that there are children who would be highly distractible, and these are the ones that the parents know and the teachers know, because it's really hard to keep them on task. One has to keep reminding them. And I'd also like to say it's not a character flaw. Temperament traits are predispositions which are genetically inherited. The job of the parent is to take the child you have and the situation they're in. So it's all about coaching them and helping them learn how to respond, to do what they're expected to do in life. And sometimes teachers go out of their way to help children learn how to stay on task. So it's a different look at the idea of distraction.
Okay, this is an interesting question as well. Do children who are born blind acquire empathy in a different manner from sighted children?
The idea of acquiring empathy, it's probably worth mentioning that we assume on all of our research and the science around that it is in the first year of life primarily that empathy is really generated. We believe it is present, but it's the relationship at birth it's present. It's the relationship between the loving people in the family and the baby that really helps it flower or fade. So that the main way that the empathy is developed is through all the senses, but touch is the most powerful of all of them. So blind babies probably even have more touch than sighted babies. I think the other ways that children develop empathy is the main part is being able to take the perspective of others and to be able to read people's emotional cues. So a baby or a child who's not sighted has difficulty reading emotional cues. They become very expert at reading emotional cues of the tone of the voice, and parents help them with that. But where parents and teachers absolutely are brilliant with this is helping children become emotionally literate. So, for example, if a child falls and cuts her knee, the parent mirrors back for the child what she thinks or he thinks the child is experiencing. So the parent might say, oh, you fell and cut your knee, that hurts a lot. You're crying, that means it hurts a lot. And the child is learning the language. Then if a child, for example, is experiencing being left out or something like that, for the parent to be able to talk about when you feel left out, you feel sad. Here's a time when I felt sad. I felt disappointed. You know, the parent explaining how they feel also gives the child the perspective of the other. But the first thing is to really understand your own feelings before you can understand the feelings of others.
Okay, thanks for that answer, Mary. We're going to squeeze in one more question. Now, this is something that so many parents are interested in. How detrimental is screen time to youth? How much screen time should kids have?
Well, this screen time has really been a big issue, I would say now for 15 years. But it's a different issue again, given this pandemic year, because many children are learning online. But if you roll back to before the pandemic, there was a lot of science to say the detrimental impact of excessive viewing of or being involved with screens in your life. And my approach at that time was not so much what are the damage that, what would the damage be really of viewing? It's what is the damage of not being able to do the other things that are more relational, like not being able to play with friends, not being able to navigate relationships, not being able to learn how to be on a team. So those things are still very important. And now that many of our children are on screens for their learning, schools are sensitive to not having very big periods of time on screen. But I think we have to be ever more vigilant about making sure we play games with children or do activities that take them away from the screen and involve them with relations. If you would like to get current percentages of impact and recommended time viewing, the best source probably is the Canadian or the American Pediatric Association report on screens.
Terrific, Mary. Thanks so much for answering those questions from our participants. And again, thanks to all of you for the questions you sent in. We weren't able to get to them all, but we certainly tried our best to answer a few of them now. And still on the whole theme of questions, we have been highlighting one empathy question each day of our symposium. Yesterday, if you tuned in, we had Dr. Michael Unger on exploring how our experience of social justice affects our empathy towards others. Today, we welcome Dr. Bruce Perry. Now, Dr. Perry has been all over the media lately because of his acclaimed book that he wrote with Oprah Winfrey. It's about childhood trauma and resilience. You might have caught it. He's been doing interviews. Well, Dr. Perry is the principal of the Neurosequential Network, senior fellow of the Child Trauma Academy, and an adjunct professor in the departments of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the Feinberg School of Medicine at Northwestern University in Chicago. The question we pose to him is, what is the role of empathy, not just in relationships, but to the world?
Hi, everybody. My name is Bruce Perry, and I'm honored to be able to make a few comments on the 25th anniversary of your wonderful organization. Congratulations for 25 years to Mary Gordon and her entire Roots of Empathy team. It's quite an accomplishment to start something and continue to transform communities, as you always say, child by child. I think one of the things that for me is most gratifying about your work is that it really is targeting a capability, a human capability that I think is at the core of our success as a species, and that is the capacity to be empathic. It's the title, the name of the organization, Roots of Empathy, is intentional. And I think it's a recognition of the powerful importance and centrality of connectedness to success as a human being, success in relationships with family, with your classmates, with your coworkers, and really with everybody who comes into your life. Some of you may know that studying the development and organization of the brain has been part of our work. And one of the most important aspects of that work has been trying to understand how developmental experiences with other human beings leads to organization of systems in the brain that make us capable of forming and maintaining healthy relationships, that make us able to do the perspective taking and the reflective cognition, all of which are part of the capacity to be empathic with another person. And one of the programs that I think has been at the forefront of helping our world understand that empathy isn't something that just genetically develops because you are a human being. Empathy is a brain-mediated capability that is organized as a function of experience, just like almost every other human function that you're aware of. Speech and language. Nobody would expect somebody to speak a language that they never heard. The ability to do mathematics. Nobody would expect somebody to be able to genetically just spontaneously be capable of doing mathematics. It's the same thing with the ability to form and maintain healthy relationships. And one of the great things about Roots of Empathy is that it's an experience-based program where you literally have meaningful relational interactions over a long period of time that allow you to build the neurobiological capacity to connect with others and to be empathic. And of course, when you are empathic with other people, you're much more likely to demonstrate those aspects of humanity that we label as humane. You're much more likely to be kind to others, to be patient, to listen, to be understanding. And when that happens, you of course have this healthy glue that allows families, communities, and cultures to work. And it's something that should be an aspirational goal of every family, of every parent, of every community, to foster and intentionally grow the capabilities of our children to be empathic. And that's exactly what Roots of Empathy does. And I think it's something that is underappreciated in our society. And I think it's something that we need to continue trying to educate our peers, our colleagues in the broader community about. The work that you do is world-changing, even if you frame it as child-changing. And I know that you kind of, it is your mantra, one child at a time, you're changing the world child by child, which I think is a great way to think about what you do. But I think you should also take some time on your 25th anniversary to reflect on the power and the importance of what you've done and the potential and the promise of what you'll be able to do as you continue doing this high quality work. So again, thank you for this opportunity. And in 25 years, at your 50th, maybe I'll have a chance to make another comment. Thank you all.
We certainly hope you are here for the 50th, Bruce. Thank you so much for those insights and for being a longtime supporter of Roots of Empathy. And right now, we want to introduce one more of our Roots of Empathy instructors, and she is talking about the powerful experience she had as a Roots of Empathy instructor.
Hi, my name is Yvonne, and I have been a Roots of Empathy instructor for 3 years. This year, unlike any other year, I have been delivering the Roots of Empathy program virtually in a school in one of the oldest African American communities in Washington, D.C. I'd like to share with you a moment when we were discussing with the children things we have lost and things we have found during this pandemic year. One student raised their hand and shared how they had lost a family member due to COVID. And one by one, the number of hands going up to share losing someone they cared about this year started increasing. And not just that, but the number of students turning on their camera while sharing was increasing as well. And this tells me that the children, they don't only want to just be heard, but they want to be seen. And the look on the students' faces, the tone in the students' voices, were all very serious, and they all respected each other's time while speaking. Nobody spoke over one another. Everybody was quiet and listened when their peers were sharing. So not only was this an impactful moment for the students, but it had a very powerful impact on the teacher as well. Because after listening to their students share, the teacher raised their hand and started speaking about a childhood friend that they lost due to COVID, and how the children's courage in sharing their pain and their loss had inspired them to share, as it was a hard subject for them to talk about. And as an instructor, I was left speechless in some moments, hearing the children express their loss and the amount of loss in just one class. But while I was left speechless, the students spoke up. And I found myself just listening to the children offering their condolences to each other and their teacher, and being a part of the work Roots of Empathy does. It's definitely changed how I approach all of my personal relationships, whether that's with family, with friends, whoever. Before being an instructor, my way of thinking was that an individual is either empathic or is just not. And it's made me understand that not all of us have the same model of a loving relationship in the first few years of life, and that birth is not destiny, as the founder of Roots of Empathy says. And Roots of Empathy has shown me that empathy can be developed, not just by witnessing those changes in the students, but by the research that the program has. And this gives me hope that our future can be one of inclusion for everyone.
Thank you, Yvonne. That was such a powerful story, and really appreciate your sharing it with us. I would now like to turn it over to Christy Clark, Chair of Roots of Empathy's Board of Directors, and she is going to share a message on behalf of the board.
I've been with Roots of Empathy for just about 20 years now, and I have seen the huge difference that this organization makes. We know that the world is experiencing a crisis of connection and a decline in empathy right now. We see it in the daily news, we see it online, and we see it in our own lives and communities. Now more than ever, children need to understand the perspective of another and to understand what it's like to stand in someone else's shoes. We need to build empathy, and we need to find our shared humanity. That's where Roots of Empathy comes in. For 25 years, Roots has delivered award-winning empathy-based programs in schools and childcare centers all across Canada in both official languages and around the world on 4 continents, reaching over 1 million children worldwide. And we have a lot to be proud of. For the 4th year in a row, 100, a global education nonprofit based in Finland, has recognized Roots of Empathy as one of the most inspirational innovations in education anywhere in the world. In 2018, we were recognized with the Governor General's Innovation Award, and we have over 2 decades of independent research from 3 continents supporting the work that we do. We know the leaders of tomorrow are sitting in the classrooms of today, and they need imagination, they need empathy to be able to identify and solve society's problems. We believe that if children have empathy, they can change the world. but we can't help them do that without your help. So I'm asking you today to make a donation to Roots of Empathy, one that will have a lasting impact for tomorrow's children, and help us continue to provide the Roots of Empathy programming in Canada and around the world. With your help, we can realize our vision, and that is to change the world, child by child. You can donate by visiting our website, rootsofempathy.org, and clicking on the donate button. Consider signing up to be a monthly donor. $20 a month can go a long way, and no donation is too small. Every dollar makes an impact. So please, I hope you'll donate today. Thank you in advance for your donation today, and thank you for joining our very first virtual research symposium.
Thank you so much, Christy, and thank you to each and every one of you for your invaluable, life-changing support of Roots of Empathy. In celebration of our 25th anniversary, it's now my honor to present the inaugural Roots of Empathy Award, this year focusing on social justice. To His Honor, Justice Maurice Sinclair. His Honor is an Anishinaabe and a member of the Pegasus First Nation. After graduating law school in '79, Justice Sinclair started his lifelong career of activism and mentorship. His Honor took on many groundbreaking roles for Indigenous lawyers, best known for leading Canada's Indian Residential School Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC. This TRC was a long-awaited apology to Indigenous people for the law that allowed government to remove Indigenous children from their homes, sometimes by force, and put them in church-run residential schools, sometimes very far away from their homes. In these schools, children were denied access to their language, their culture, and their families, causing generational trauma, which families are still recovering from. TRC brought the stories of the survivors into the living rooms of the nation. Justice Sinclair was a witness to the hundreds of harrowing stories from the residential school survivors. Here you see him comforting one of those survivors. His strength springs from love of family and culture. Raised by his grandparents and in loving partnership with his wife, with whom he created the Ojibwe Immersion Nursery School program in Winnipeg, which is a celebration of both culture and language. In 2015, His Honor was appointed to the Canadian Senate by the Prime Minister. Known all his life for speaking truth to power, he was often a critic of the Prime Minister, but always remained a warm and respectful relationship. His Honor left the Senate before his term was completed to focus his energy on mentoring young Indigenous lawyers in Manitoba and on writing his autobiography. Justice Sinclair is a truth seeker, a knowledge sharer, and a human bridge to understanding and empathy. He asks for the support of initiatives and activities that build students' capacity for intercultural understanding, empathy, and mutual respect. And there is a formula for a fair and inclusive country. Your Honor, it is our honor to present you with this award.
Well, thank you very much, Mary, for this terrific honor that's being bestowed upon me. I can't tell you what it means because working with children as the organization that you represent has been doing historically is one of the fundamental beliefs of the traditions that I come from. We are told, of course, that when our children are born, that they are a sacred gift from the Creator, and that it's our responsibility to take care of them. But that in addition to that, that nurturing that we provide to them is returned many times by them to us as parents, to their older brothers and sisters, and to others in the community, because we can see directly the results of our relationship with them. We can see directly when we talk to them in a loud and harsh way, or some kind of noise disturbs them. And we know that that means that something has gone wrong and that we have to immediately change. And so working with little children and bringing little children into the company of other children is a brilliant way of showing how those other children can learn from them and can be empathetic to their needs and to their sometimes demands, because the one thing we've learned from working with little children is sometimes they can tell you very clearly what it is that they want from you, and we're expected to respond to that. So this particular award from your organization is one that really has a lot of meaning for me. I've worked with people of all ages over the years. And I worked with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, of course. I worked with residential school survivors. And the one thing that I can tell you that I observed firsthand in the work that I did with the residential school survivors was that their feelings, their trauma, their experiences centered often upon their early treatment and the fact that sometimes they were separated from their siblings when they were taken to those schools. And so those early relationships that they needed to formulate with their brothers and sisters, both as infants, as little children, but also as older siblings, was lost to them. And that was a terrible feeling that they had, and they spoke about that frequently. So this honor that you're bestowing upon me is very meaningful, and I appreciate it very deeply. And I thank you for including me in the circle that you have formed around this important topic. Very much.
Thank you for those beautiful words. On behalf of Roots of Empathy, we would like to present you with this print titled Early Lessons by Inuit artist Malai Putukuk.
Thank you, Mary. It's beautiful. Beautiful gift, and thank you very much for the honor that you bestowed upon me, not only with regard to the award that I've been given, but also with regard to this beautiful piece of art, which I assure you will occupy an important place in my house. And just so you know, as well as everybody else who gives me gifts such as this, at the end of the time that I spend here on this earth, the artwork that I get is going to all go to the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. So I think they'll be looking forward to getting this too. But thank you very much.
Oh, that's such a lovely gesture, Your Honor. We're happy to hear that, and I'm thrilled to be able to meet you today. I wanted to ask you, in your acceptance speech, you started off by saying that empathy is central to Indigenous values. What role has empathy played in your pursuit of social justice?
Well, it's only in hindsight that I'm able to look back at many of the incidents that occurred in my life in order to appreciate how they affected me and how I was affected by them. But it was because I grew up in poverty. I grew up along with other children who were living in poverty. And while we were envious of others who had more than we did, we learned to make do with what we had. And we learned to also appreciate what we got when we were able to get it and to share in those things. And as I grew older, we also learned to take care of each other, because in the community where I grew up, as it is elsewhere in the world, children coming from impoverished circumstances are often the ones who are first picked on, who are bullied, who are spoken negatively about. And coming out of an environment like that, your first reaction might be one of anger and resentment, but also it is about taking care of each other that I grew up with, in the sense that others who were going through those very strong emotions needed help to be able to cope with them in order to continue to move forward. And so I learned to help them. I was able to read earlier than most kids, so I would help others read. I learned to understand what was going on and how to talk to adults, and I learned to question them when others couldn't at my age. And So just learning how to help each other and how to be there for each other was an important part of my growing up. But I later learned from elders as I went through understanding our long traditions, our long-held traditions, that empathy and understanding and caring for each other were important parts of all of our teachings. And it was one of the very first teachings that the Creator gave to Anishinaabe when he lowered Anishinaabe to this earth.
You, as you mentioned, you were chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, and many people regard that report as a turning point in this country in terms of awareness and justice for Indigenous peoples. Can you talk about the role of empathy in reconciliation?
One of the important questions that we had to address at the very beginning of the work of the TRC was, how do we get Canadians to care about this? It wasn't like the story of the oppression of Indigenous people was a new story. Many people had known over the years of things that had occurred. By the early part of this century, people were well aware of what had gone on, had been written about. It had been shown in documentaries and news stories. But it's like people didn't know how to care about that, didn't seem to care about it. So when we were talking about doing the work that we were doing, I asked the staff, how can we get Canadians to care? And they talked amongst themselves about things. And at the end of the day, I said, after they had all had a chance to share their thoughts, I said, I think the one way of getting them to care is to get them to see that these were children that this was done to. And the best way to get them to see that this was about children is to make them think about their children, make them think about what they would feel like and how they would feel if this happened to them, if this happened to their children. And so in all of the work that we did, we tried to ensure that the stories that the survivors told were about their childhood. And we tried to ensure that Canadians were included in listening to those stories as well. And then we would challenge them to ask themselves the question, if this had happened to me, or if this had happened to my friend, or if this happened to my children, what would I think? And what would I want to do about it? And that's what empathy is. Empathy is the ability to put yourself into the place of the other person and look at it from the other side of the street.
I really appreciate your sharing your experiences about your life and your work with us today, Your Honor, and the profound insights that you've offered us as well. Thank you on behalf of Roots of Empathy for spending time with us and also for accepting our award.
Thank you very much for this terrific award, for this recognition, and for the honor that you have bestowed upon me.
That was very moving for me to be able to speak to former Justice and Senator Murray Sinclair. Well, that brings us to the end of our 2021 Roots of Empathy Research Symposium. On behalf of the entire Roots of Empathy team and board of directors, I want to express how incredibly grateful we are to all our speakers and all our guests, all of you for joining us from all over the world, 52 countries over these past 2 days. I was so excited for this day to come, and now, Mary, I'm kind of sad that it's over. Now more than ever, the world needs empathy. And here at Roots of Empathy, we believe deeply that empathy has the power to change the world, one child, one person at a time. Over the past 2 days, we've learned how empathy can help us improve our well-being as individuals and as a society, how we can foster empathy in our children so they thrive. We felt what it means to be a Black father in today's world. We heard about the critical role empathy plays in leadership and in business. We've explored the beginnings of empathy and its outcome from a variety of perspectives. The conversations we've had have been incredibly eye-opening for me, and I hope they've been that way for you. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, LiUNA and Nivea, for making this event possible, and also to our event partner, fluid events for doing a wonderful job. If you'd like to help Roots of Empathy continue to build on this critical work through our programs and research, please consider making a special donation today. Every donation, no matter how small, plays a direct role in carrying forward the empathy movement, a movement that holds the power and potential to build a stronger, more caring, and inclusive world. Visit us at rootsofempathy.org. And thank you once again. We hope you stay safe and well during this challenging time. And before we go, here's one last video we've put together to give our children the final word.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Green. My hope for the world in 2021 is that COVID ends. I also hope that the world is equal and fair to everyone.
Hello, my name is Darwin. I am from Corpus Christi School, and I am here to tell you my wish for 2021. My wishes for 2021 is that COVID-19 ends, all the wearing masks stops, people that are sick get better.
Hello, my name is Vivian, and my hope for the world in 2021 is that people respect diversity.
Hi, my name is AJ. My hope for 2021 is for COVID-19 to go away and have a good life and get rid of the masks and social distancing and to play with my friends.
My name is Gia, and my hope for 2021 is that COVID-19 ends and racism stops. Wildfires end, death threats stop, and the COVID-19 vaccines come. And overall, the world just becomes a better place.
My name is Emmanuel, and my hope for the world in 2021 is for COVID to go and to have joy and to be loved and grateful.
My name is Curly. My hope for the world is for people to take care of our planet. My hope in 2021 is for people to be happy.
Hi, my name's Grace, and my hope for the world in 2021 is that it's the end of COVID and people get freedom and no more war. Lots of love for family.